Tonight, let us begin on an ordinary street at an ordinary hour, when the day has mostly folded itself away, and the pavement is giving back a little of the heat it borrowed from the sun. A person and a dog are walking together beneath porch lights and small trees. There is nothing dramatic in the scene, no storm, no chase, no strange cry from the dark, just a leash, a slow pair of footsteps, and the mild evening habit of going around the block. And then the dog stops, not at a rabbit crossing the yard, not at another dog approaching from the corner, not at a dropped sandwich or some other obvious treasure. It stops on a patch of pavement that appears, to the human beside it, completely blank. Gray concrete, a little grit, perhaps a leaf pinned to the curb, nothing to justify such concentration. Yet the dog lowers its head as if reading a note left in excellent handwriting. This is one of the small daily frictions between human certainty and animal experience. We tend to assume that our companions share the same world we do, only with some settings adjusted. Better hearing, perhaps, stronger smell, sharper night vision, the same basic scene merely enhanced at the edges. That calm assumption begins to wobble the moment a dog becomes absorbed in what looks, to us, like nothing at all. The biologist Jakob von Uexküll gave a useful name to this problem more than a century ago. He called it the Umwelt, the lived perceptual world of an organism, the particular slice of reality that becomes meaningful to that creature because of the body it has and the nervous system it carries, not the whole environment in some grand objective sense, but the environment as it appears to a tick, or a gull, or a dog, or a human being with shoes on a sidewalk after dinner. That distinction matters more than it first seems. We speak casually of reality as though it were simply there, fully available, waiting for anyone with open eyes. In practice, every animal receives only a selection. Bodies are filters before they are windows. Receptors admit some signals and ignore others. Nerves emphasize certain changes and discard others as background. Brains do not present the world raw. They build a usable version of it, one stitched from whatever the senses can gather and whatever the organism needs in order to survive. So the evening street is not one scene shared equally by two companions. It is at least two scenes layered over the same asphalt. For the human, the street is mostly visual. It is edges and shadows, parked cars, the amber circle under a lamp, the white seam of the crosswalk, the dark shape of a hedge. For the dog, all of that may matter too, but another architecture lies over it. A traffic of evaporating chemicals, fading trails, fresh deposits, overlapping signatures, old messages partly erased by wind and warm stone and new footsteps. When we say that dogs smell far better than we do, the phrase is correct but a little too neat, as if this were simply a matter of turning up the volume. It is closer to saying that the dog is consulting a library while we are staring at the building from outside. A pavement slab that seems mute to us may hold the recent passage of another dog, the direction it moved, whether it was stressed or calm, male or female, familiar or strange, perhaps even how long ago it passed. The exact contents of that chemical story are still a subject of careful research, and one should be modest here. Dogs are not reading sentences, but they are extracting structured information from scent traces so rich that our own version of the scene feels almost embarrassingly incomplete. Ours can remain present in this way, A body brushes against grass. Pads touch the curb. Urine dries but does not vanish. Air currents lift molecules, carry them, scatter them, return them to another nose. What to us is an empty patch of pavement may, to the dog, be a crowded intersection of recent histories. The ground has become less like a surface and more like paper written on, erased, and written on again. It is tempting to call this hidden world invisible, but even that is a human-centered shortcut. The chemical signals are not failed pictures. They are not secret images awaiting the proper translation. They are physical events in the world, and the dog's body has equipment for detecting them, just as our eyes have equipment for detecting a narrow band of light. The important thing is not that one creature gets the truth while another is left in ignorance. The important thing is that no creature gets everything. One way to picture this is to imagine a large dark room filled with furniture, books, bowls of fruit, hanging coats, mirrors, maps, dust in the air, and quiet movement in the corners. Each animal enters carrying a lantern, but each lantern is built differently. One throws a warm circle low to the ground. Another catches only reflective threads. Another reveals heat. Another notices the faint alignment of a field passing through the room. None illuminates the whole space. None is defective for failing to do so. Each is tuned to what that animal most needs to find. Our mistake is not that we sense too little. Every nervous system senses too little. The mistake is imagining that our own lantern is the room. This becomes oddly comforting once you accept it. The world grows larger without becoming hostile. The familiar street remains a street, but it is now pleasantly crowded with inaccessible information. The hedge is releasing odors no human could sort. The air contains currents a moth may read with exquisite seriousness. The paving stones are holding temperature differences, moisture traces, residues of passing life. Beside us, a dog pauses not because it is distracted by nothing, but because it is attending to something that belongs to its world as fully as color belongs to ours. And our world, for all its confidence, is just as constructed. We live by the samples our bodies can take. We trust the outputs because they are coherent and useful, not because they are complete. Human reality is a practical draft, not the final manuscript. So as we continue, it helps to keep that dog and that blank square of pavement with us. They offer a polite correction at the start of our journey. The earth is not one finished scene through which different animals move with greater or lesser skill. It is a place of overlapping access, many partial worlds pressed together in the same garden, the same shoreline, the same night road. And since sight is the sense humans trust first, the one we often mistake for reality itself, that is where we will go next, into the thin sliver of light our eyes admit, and into the much larger brightness passing around us unnoticed. The dog has moved on, but dusk is still doing its quiet work. A blue shirt becomes less blue. The red on a parked car seems to sink inward. Leaves that looked crisp a few minutes ago begin to gather into one dark, patient mass. Nothing in the street has changed its material. The change is in the light, and in the narrow little instrument through which we receive it. We speak as if visible light were simply light itself, the obvious substance of the world. We also speak as if color lives inside objects the way water lives inside a glass. An apple is red, the sky is blue, a lemon is yellow. It is a useful way to talk, and for ordinary life it works perfectly well. But it is also a kind of polite simplification, the sort of thing reality allows because we are busy and need to cross the road. Light, in the broader sense, is far larger than the bright ribbon we happen to notice. It belongs to one long electromagnetic spectrum, a continuous spread of wavelengths ranging from enormous radio waves to tiny gamma rays. Human eyes respond to only a small middle stretch of that expanse, roughly the band we call visible. We do not stand outside the spectrum and survey it like a grand staircase. We occupy a few steps in the middle and, having been born there, tend to mistake them for the whole house. An old piano is a gentler model than a staircase. Imagine a keyboard with many more octaves than any concert hall would tolerate, notes descending into rooms of vibration too slow for us to hear and climbing into pitches too high to name. Human vision plays only a modest cluster of middle keys. The instrument continues far below and far above, but our eyes do not answer when those notes are struck. Even within our narrow keyboard, color is not sitting on the keys waiting to be discovered. Color is made in the encounter between light and tissue and brain. Surfaces absorb some wavelengths and reflect others. Those reflected photons enter the eye, pass through the lens and fall upon the retina, a thin living sheet at the back of the eye. There the work is handed to photoreceptors, rods and cones. Rods are the patient specialists of dimness. They are extremely sensitive and wonderfully suited to twilight, moonlight, shadowed hallways, and all the half-seen hours when shape matters more than hue. But rods do not provide much color. They are, in their manner, practical creatures. They tell us that something is there, that it moved, that the branch ends here and the stair begins there. They are night clerks, not painters. Cones are the daylight interpreters. Humans usually have three main kinds, each containing light-sensitive proteins called opsins. These opsins do not come labeled red, green, and blue in the neat way children's crayons do. Their sensitivities overlap. Each cone type responds more strongly to certain ranges of wavelengths than to others, and the brain compares the pattern of activity across them. Out of that comparison, an experience of color is constructed, not extracted. Constructed, that distinction matters. A wavelength is a physical event. Red is an experience. The first can be measured by an instrument on a laboratory bench. The second exists as a nervous system solution to a problem, how to sort useful differences in incoming light. When we say a rose is red, what we really mean is that under these conditions, to a human visual system with three cone classes, this pattern of reflected light reliably produces the experience we call red. It is accurate enough for romance, florists, and traffic laws. It is also delightfully less absolute than it sounds. This is why other animals do not inhabit brighter, sharper, upgraded versions of our own scene. They inhabit differently edited ones. Change the receptor set, and you change the cuts between colors, the contrasts that pop forward, and the signals that disappear. A dog, with fewer cone types than a typical human, does not merely see our rainbow with the saturation turned down. The divisions themselves are different. Many birds, meanwhile, carry 4 cone types rather than 3, and often include sensitivity that reaches into ultraviolet. Their daylight may contain distinctions our eyes never propose in the first place. It is tempting to imagine that as a better camera. But cameras borrow too much from our own habits of seeing. A bird's retina is not trying to produce a deluxe human photograph. It is serving a bird. It is tuned to feathers, fruit, sky, distance, motion, courtship, and navigation. Vision evolves the way tools evolve. A spoon is not an inferior fork, and a fork is not an advanced spoon. They divide the world according to different jobs. By evening, our own arrangement begins to reveal its bias. As light fades, cones lose authority and rods take over. Colors flatten. Reds often dim first. Blues and grays seem to linger. The world has not drained its pigments away like paint rinsing off in rain. Our retina has simply shifted staff. One department is going home. Another is stepping quietly onto the floor. That quiet transfer tells us something profound and oddly soothing. Darkness is not the opposite of sight in any simple sense. Color is not the permanent property of things. Both depend on anatomy, on sensitivity, on what receptors are present, and how a brain has learned to compare their signals. The evening street feels familiar because we have walked it so many times. Yet even here the world is reminding us that perception is a local arrangement, not a final truth. And once that becomes clear, flowers begin to seem a little less decorative and a little more secretive. In the next patch of garden, petals that look plain to us may already be carrying bold guides in wavelengths we leave entirely unread, like messages written in a polite ink meant for someone else. At first light, a garden can look almost undecided. The air is cool, the soil still dark from the night, that each flower seems to be waiting for the day to fully arrive before it says very much. To us, a blossom often feels complete the moment we can name its color. White daisy, yellow buttercup, purple crocus. We glance, we sort, and we move on. A flower appears to be exactly what it shows on its petals, as though its message were pinned plainly to the surface. For any passing eye, many flowers are not addressing every eye equally. Their visible petals are only part of the announcement. Over the top of the colors we recognize, another set of signals could be present, painted in light that our vision does not naturally admit. In the ultraviolet portion of sunlight, a blossom that looks simple to us may carry a bold target, a dark center, a ring, stripes, or a path leading inward. What seems to be a quiet decorative face can become, for the right viewer, a signboard with directions. This is one of the gentler shocks in the study of animal perception. Nothing about the flower needs to move. Nothing flashes or crackles. The petals sit exactly where they were a moment ago, and yet the meaning of the flower changes completely when a different kind of eye arrives in front of it. Bees are among the best-known readers of these hidden signs. Their vision does not match ours simply with the brightness turned up, with the colors rearranged. It is built from a different combination of sensitivities. Where humans typically rely on receptors tuned to longer, middle, and shorter visible wavelengths, bees are sensitive to ultraviolet, blue, and green. That means some surfaces that appear nearly identical to us can separate cleanly for a bee, while some contrasts we find obvious matter less to them. The world is not just recolored, it is reorganized. Because sunlight contains ultraviolet, petals can reflect or absorb that light in patterns. A flower may reflect strongly at its outer edges while absorbing more at the center. To us, the whole petal may look uniformly yellow. To a bee approaching from the air, the same blossom can look more like a landing mark, bright around the perimeter, darker where the nectar and pollen are found. The effect is often called a nectar guide, though it is not a little arrow in the cartoon sense. It is more like a runway made visible only to the travelers for whom it was designed. Imagine a bee crossing the garden in the early morning. From our distance, The flower below is a neat circle, tasteful and still. From the bee's distance, the same flower may sharpen into instruction, not language exactly and not intention in the human sense, but a reliable arrangement of contrast. Here is the outer field. Here is the center worth investigating. Here is where the body should land, where the legs will brush pollen, where feeding and pollination can happen in one efficient visit. Scientists have photographed flowers through ultraviolet sensitive equipment for more than a century, and the resulting images can be startling, not because they reveal fantasy, but because they reveal how much ordinary life has been proceeding without our notice. Black-eyed Susans, buttercups, evening primroses, sunflowers, and many other blossoms can show strong ultraviolet patterning. Even flowers that seem pale and plain to us may carry dramatic contrasts in wavelengths we do not see. The garden has been quietly labeled all along. Still, there is a limit to how neatly we can translate that view back into human terms. You will often see false color images meant to approximate what a bee might perceive, with ultraviolet rendered as visible blues or purples for our convenience. These images are useful, but they are interpretations, not windows cut directly into the bee's experience. A bee does not have a tiny human mind inside it looking at purple overlays. Its nervous system combines signals from its own receptors into a meaningful scene shaped by bee life. Approach, land, feed, remember, repeat. The point is not to force their sight to become ours with a filter added. The point is to understand that the flower and the pollinator have met each other through a channel we barely detect exists. That channel matters because it changes behavior. A clear ultraviolet pattern can help a pollinator orient more quickly and handle a flower more efficiently. Over long stretches of time, flowers that better attract and guide the right visitors can leave more descendants, while pollinators that better read those patterns can forage with less waste. So the blossom is not merely beautiful in so abstract botanical way. It is part of a practical relationship, toned by repeated visits and repeated seasons. Plant and insect have, in effect, shaped a private visual conversation in the middle of a very public garden. Private, though not secret from nature. Other insects can read parts of this language too, and different flowers present different designs depending on whom they are trying to reach. The important point is that the petals are not passive decoration. They are working surfaces, optical devices made of tissue and pigment, catching sunlight and sending some of it back in highly selective ways. We tend to think of gardens as color arranged for our pleasure. The flowers, with great politeness, have other priorities. There is something almost funny in that. A human bends down to admire a blossom and thinks, more or less, how lovely. A bee arrives and sees instructions. One visitor receives an ornament, the other receives an address, and yet the comedy gives way to something more tender. The hidden sign does not make the flower less beautiful to us. It makes it more inhabited by purpose. It reminds us that stillness is not emptiness. A blossom standing in cool morning air may be participating in an exchange as specific and ancient as any spoken invitation. Come here, land here, take this, carry that. The petals do not need to shout. They only need to be legible to the right body. So the garden becomes busier, though nothing obvious has changed. The same beds, the same stems, the same soft opening of day. But layered over the visible scene is a second arrangement of emphasis and direction, a luminous map riding on the surface of petals. We cannot enter it directly, only approximate it with instruments and patience. Even so, once you know it is there, the ordinary flower never fully returns to being ordinary. And this is still only light. We have not yet left the broad family of signals that travel from sun to surface to eye. In the next turn, the strangeness deepens, because some animals do not just use the amount or color of light. They use its orientation, finding information in the way light is angled across the world, as though the sky itself had been quietly combed into lines. By the time we lift our attention from the flower and look upward, the world seems to simplify. A blossom can hide patterns in ultraviolet. A leaf can gleam in ways we do not notice. But the sky, especially once the sun has slipped behind thin cloud or pale morning haze, appears almost blank. It is just blue, spread evenly over everything, with no obvious arrows drawn across it. For a human traveler, that blankness matters. If you remove roads, mountains, trees, and the visible sun, direction becomes surprisingly fragile. We like to think we know where we are going, but much of that confidence is borrowed from landmarks. Put a person in an open desert where the ground repeats itself, and the horizon offers little help, and the mind begins to loosen its grip. One patch of earth resembles the next. One low ripple of sand looks politely similar to another, and yet on such ground, a desert ant can leave home, wander in a looping search for food, and then return in a line so direct it seems almost rude. The nest entrance it seeks may be no more than a tiny hole in a harsh and nearly featureless plain. No signpost rises above it. No little flag announces, "Home is here." The ant heads back anyway, as if the empty morning has been speaking to it the whole time. What the ant uses is not a hidden road painted onto the sand. It is written overhead. Sunlight arrives from the sun in a mixed and unruly state, but once that light enters Earth's atmosphere, it collides with molecules and small particles in the air. Those encounters scatter shorter wavelengths efficiently, which is one reason the daytime sky looks blue to us. But scattering does something else as well. It gives portions of the sky a pattern of polarization, meaning that the light waves become oriented in particular directions. Human vision is mostly indifferent to this. The sky remains blue paint on a dome. For certain insects, though, that blue is crossed by delicate organization. If we try to imagine it, the safest metaphor is a painterly one. Picture faint brushstrokes laid across a wash of blue, so soft that our own eyes slide over them without complaint. The brushstrokes are not brighter or darker in any theatrical way. They are direction. Their angle changes depending on where you look relative to the sun. Even when the sun itself is hidden, the wider pattern can remain available across the sky, like a map made of texture, instead of color. This is not mystical, only inconveniently subtle. Many insects possess photoreceptors that are especially sensitive to polarized light. In bees, ants, and other arthropods, parts of the compound eye can compare the angle of this polarized skylight and use it as compass information. The details differ across species, and scientists are careful not to turn a working sensory system into a cartoon dashboard. Still, the broad fact is firm. Some insects do not simply see a blue ceiling. They detect an organized field overhead, and that field helps anchor direction. Desert ants make the point beautifully because their landscape is so stingy with clues. Species studied in North African salt pans and deserts may travel far from the nest in meandering routes while searching for dead insects or scraps of plant matter. While they move, they keep track of distance and direction, combining several streams of information into a running estimate of where home lies. This is sometimes called path integration, and it works rather like a continuously updated return vector, a quiet arithmetic performed by a very small animal under a very large sky. The sky compass is one part of that arithmetic. If researchers alter the pattern of polarized light reaching an ant, the animal's orientation can shift accordingly. If the available sky is blocked, performance changes. The implication is wonderfully plain. The ant is not following a remembered picture of the desert floor. It is consulting the structure of daylight itself. There is a dry comedy in this. We are inclined to praise grand navigators, sailors, pilots, migrating birds. Then along comes an ant, carrying a crumb, using properties of scattered light that many humans never think about once in their entire lives. This does not mean the ant possesses a perfect supernatural certainty. Real navigation is rarely built from one cue alone, and the insect's world is full of contingencies. Wind can alter odor trails. Ground texture can matter. Step counting, sun position, landmarks near the nest, and polarized light may all contribute in different proportions depending on the species and the situation. But the sky remains an astonishing partner because it offers something the ground sometimes cannot. A broad, stable frame of reference spread over the whole scene. That is the larger consequence of polarization on land. An apparently empty sky can carry usable geometry. Where we see open space, another animal may find orientation. Where we feel exposed to sameness, it may read consistency. The desert becomes less like a blank page and more like a page written in very pale ink. There is also something quietly humbling here about human confidence in the visible world. We often assume that if a place looks plain, then it is plain. If the blue above us appears uniform, we call it uniform and move on. But that judgment only reports the limits of our own equipment. The atmosphere has not promised to arrange itself around our preferences. It is full of physical order that need not become human experience in order to exist. So the ant crosses the open ground beneath a sky full of structure. They're not structure in the form we would naturally request. Above it, scattered sunlight holds a directional pattern. Below it, the land offers little mercy and even less decoration. Between those two austerities, one tiny nervous system keeps its bearing and returns to a whole almost no larger than the ant itself. It is an elegant answer to a familiar problem. How do you get home when the world gives you almost nothing to hold on to? Sometimes the answer is that the world was giving you something all along. It was simply written in a script your eyes never learned to read. And if dry air and morning blue can hide such guidance overhead, then water, with its own scattering and shifting light, may hide another version of the same secret. The compass written in the sky does not end at the shore. It follows light downward into darker places where different eyes are waiting. Above the sea, glare feels like a kind of erasure. A bright afternoon can flatten the water into one hard sheet of silver, as if the surface has decided to keep its secrets. From a boat or a pier, we squint, shift our angle, and try to see through the shine. Usually we fail. The reflected sky wins. The water looks blank where a whole layered world is moving just beneath it. It is tempting to assume that this blankness only gets worse below the surface. Water scatters light. Suspended particles catch it and toss it sideways. Every ripple rearranges brightness. Distance softens edges. A clear outline on land becomes a suggestion in the sea. If you were designing a place to make vision difficult, You might invent shallow ocean water at noon, dazzling from above, milky from within, full of flicker and interference. And yet, for some animals, that shimmer is not only an obstacle, it is also a clue. In the previous chapter, polarized light helped animals use the sky like a map. Underwater, the same physical property takes on a different job. Here it is less about finding north and more about pulling form out of confusion. Light entering the sea is filtered, redirected, and scattered until the water seems to write over everything at once. But hidden inside that brightness is extra structure. The light is not merely bright or dim, it also has orientation. And to an animal that can detect that orientation, the ocean's glare contains a second layer of information. You can think of it as a second layer of ink hidden inside the shimmer. To us, the page looks washed out. To the right eye, another script is still there. This matters because many marine creatures are difficult to see in the ordinary sense. Some are transparent, some are silvery. Some survive by matching the general brightness of the water around them so well that they seem to dissolve. In air, camouflage often means resembling bark, sand, or leaves. In open water, camouflage can mean becoming a moving fragment of the light itself. That is elegant, but it creates a problem. Transparent tissues and reflective surfaces can reduce ordinary contrast, yet they may still alter polarized light in ways that betray their presence. A body that looks almost absent by brightness alone can stand out when the orientation of the light shifts across it. Instead of asking, "Is that patch lighter or darker?" an animal can ask a subtler question. Is the light there organized differently from the water around it? For a hunting cuttlefish, that difference can be useful. Cuttlefish are often described through their changing skin, their liquid posture, their unnervingly deliberate attention. They hover rather than simply swim. They inspect. They seem less like arrows and more like thinking clouds with fins. Many species do not appear to have rich conventional color vision in the way humans imagine it. That point is easy to understand. Limited color discrimination does not mean crude sight. It means their visual priorities are arranged differently. In a dim, busy, glittering world, other channels may matter more. One of those channels is polarization sensitivity. Imagine a cuttlefish moving over a reef as daylight weakens. The water is full of reflections from sand, shell, and scales. Tiny suspended particles make the scene look slightly dusty, as if the sea has its own weather even on a calm day. Ahead is prey that would not impress a human observer at all. Perhaps a small silvery fish turning just enough to disappear into the general sparkle, or a nearly transparent crustacean that seems made of the same substance as the water itself. To our eyes, especially in low contrast, this is the kind of target that keeps slipping away. But the cuttlefish is not reading the scene only as brightness. Parts of the prey may disturb the polarization pattern of the surrounding light. Reflective tissues, muscle fibers, and outer surfaces can change how that light is organized. Against the ocean's noisy background, the animal does not necessarily become vivid in the way a red apple is vivid on a white plate. It separates more quietly than that. It becomes distinct by rule rather than by color, by texture in the light's orientation, rather than by simple outline. That is an important distinction throughout this episode. When we describe what these animals detect, any image we make in our minds is only an approximation. We are borrowing our own visual habits to point toward something that is not naturally given to us. The cuttlefish does not see a little human style overlay labeled polarization. It uses a sensory cue that helps divide object from water, signal from glare, body from background, and the story does not end with hunting. In cephalopods, polarization may also matter socially. Cuttlefish and squid are famous for sending rapid signals across their skin, changing patterns in waves and flashes so quickly that the body sometimes seems to think out loud. Some of these displays may create contrasts that are especially meaningful to other polarization-sensitive viewers. In dim or cluttered water, a message can ride not only on ordinary brightness, but on this quieter optical channel as well. That possibility has a lovely economy to it. The same sea that hides animals can also give them a discreet way to reveal themselves to the right audience. A reef does not need silence to contain a private conversation. It only needs different receivers. This turns a familiar assumption upside down. We often imagine noisy environments as damaged ones, places where information has been lost. But evolution is opportunistic. If the world produces a reliable pattern, some body will eventually learn to use it. Underwater scattering, reflection, and glare do not simply erase detail. They generate a complex field of structured light, and certain animals have become skilled readers of that structure. Looks to us like optical clutter becomes, for them, a working surface. It is a little like walking into a room where everyone else sees smudged glass, while one person notices the fingerprints, the direction of wiping, the faint pressure marks where a hand pushed and lifted away. The glass has not stopped being messy. It has become informative in a different way. That shift changes how we should picture the ocean itself. Not as a blurry failure of terrestrial vision, but as its own medium with its own legible signals. Water does not merely distort the world. It edits the light into new forms, then offers those forms to creatures built to notice them. So a cuttlefish drifts through what looks to us like broken brightness. It pauses. Somewhere in the shimmer, a nearly invisible body stops being part of the water and becomes a separate thing, not loudly, not dramatically, just enough. A hidden line appears inside the glare and the hunter moves. We can stay with that image for a moment. The sea surface bright above, the reef dim below, and within the haze a message written in the angle of light rather than its color. It is a reminder that invisibility is never absolute. It depends on who is looking and with what kind of body. In the next chapter, even light itself will begin to feel less central. Because after animals learn to read brightness, color, ultraviolet traces, and polarized shimmer, some go one step further still. They do not wait for light to describe a warm body in the dark. They sense the warmth directly. The sea at night can feel empty in one way and crowded in another. A dark surface closes over the last blue light, and the world seems to simplify itself. Then we leave the water, move inland, and discover that darkness on land is not simple either. In a warm forest after sunset, the branches go black, the leaf litter fades, and the ordinary human assumption quietly returns. If a hunter is moving through that darkness, surely it must depend on smell or on touch, or on the rustle of something careless in the leaves. That expectation is reasonable because complete darkness, to us, sounds like the end of seeing. But for some snakes, darkness is not the end of directional detail. It is the moment another kind of pattern becomes useful. Pit vipers, including rattlesnakes and copperheads, carry a pair of small openings between the eye and the nostril, one on each side of the face. Boas and pythons possess related heat-sensitive organs along the lips. These are not ordinary eyes, and they do not turn the night into a bright, secret picture. What they do instead is stranger and more delicate. They allow the animal to detect infrared radiation, the thermal energy constantly given off by warm bodies. Everything with a temperature above absolute zero emits radiation. We live inside this fact without noticing it. A cup of tea cools into the room. A stone wall slowly releases the day. A sleeping bird, a rabbit under grass, a mouse near a root all shed a little warmth outward into space. Human skin does it too, cheerfully, whether or not we wish to remain inconspicuous. The remarkable part is not that warmth radiates. The remarkable part is that a snake can use that radiation to locate where something is. In a pit viper, each facial pit is a small chamber with an opening that emits infrared energy. Inside lies a thin membrane suspended in air, richly supplied with nerve endings and blood vessels. That thinness matters. A thick surface would be sluggish, slow to respond. This one is more like a delicate drum skin, except the pressure it answers to is not sound but faint heat arriving from the outside world. When infrared radiation from a nearby animal reaches the membrane, it warms it by a tiny amount. Specialized heat-sensitive ion channels in the nerve endings respond to that minute change, converting it into signals the nervous system can use. The effect is not magic, and it is not ordinary vision extended into a redder part of the spectrum. Human eyes cannot simply be imagined with a different filter attached. The snake's pit organ is a separate sensory system with its own anatomy and its own logic. It detects heat, but it does so in a spatially meaningful way because the structure of the pit gives direction to the signal. Radiation arriving from one angle affects the membrane differently than radiation arriving from another. Across that small suspended surface, the pattern of warming carries information about position, so the snake is not merely thinking, something warm is nearby. It can distinguish where that warmth lies in front of its head. This is especially useful just after sunset, when the day is still leaking out of the ground and the air is beginning to cool. Imagine a rattlesnake settled beside a run of dry earth and scattered grass. To us, the scene would be almost unusable. We might see the pale suggestion of stones, perhaps the silhouette of a stem if the moon is kind. But a mouse emerging from cover is not thermally identical to the soil beneath it. Its small body is warmer than the ground. That temperature contrast produces an outline the snake can detect. Not a tidy cartoon mouse, not a little glowing cutout, but a directional warm shape separated from a cooler background. Experiments have shown how meaningful this can be. Pit vipers can strike accurately at warm targets even when visible light is absent, and when the heat signal is altered, their accuracy changes with it. The thermal information is not a decorative extra. It participates in the act of hunting. What makes this even more elegant is that the snake's brain does not leave the infrared signal isolated, like a note pinned to the edge of perception. Neural pathways carry input from the pit organs into regions that also receive visual information. In species that have both good eyes and good pits, the animal can combine these streams. A moving object may be present as both shape and warmth. A branch may belong to vision but not to heat. A mouse may belong to both. The result is not a human-like movie with a colored thermal overlay, despite the way we often visualize it for ourselves. It is better understood as a nervous system aligning multiple clues about the same world, merging them into a more useful target. That distinction matters because our metaphors can become too confident. We are tempted to say the snake sees heat, as though it has simply opened another pair of eyes. But the safer, more accurate idea is that it detects radiant warmth and maps it onto space. The experience on the snake's side of that process is hidden from us. We can describe the mechanism, test the behavior, and sketch approximations, but we cannot borrow the feeling of it directly. Still, even at the edge of what we cannot translate, the consequences are plain enough. A warm animal concealed by darkness is less concealed than it seems. A predator lying still can monitor the approach of something living. A threatened snake can also use heat to judge a large nearby body, including one that is trying, with very limited success, not to be noticed. The forest floor may look uniformly black to us, yet to the snake it is divided by differences in temperature, by fading footprints of sunlight, by trunks cooling at one rate and stones at another, and by the steady, soft announcement made by warm flesh. This ability has limits, of course. Thermal scenes can be noisy. A landscape baked all day may continue to glow with stored heat. Distance reduces detail. Wind and background temperature matter. The system is exquisitely useful, not omniscient. Evolution rarely builds perfection when a reliable advantage will do, and that may be the gentlest lesson hidden inside the rattlesnake's face. Perception is not a grand window flung open onto everything that exists. It is a patient arrangement of useful biases. For us, night removes shape. For the snake, night also reveals one, so the forest remains dark, and almost nothing changes in our human picture of it. Leaves are still black. Roots are still black. Air is still black. Yet moving through that same darkness is a small, warm outline that does not disappear, a living ember with edges soft enough to miss and clear enough to strike. In the next quiet turn, warmth will no longer be enough. Another animal will build shape from a different invisible return, sending something outward and waiting for the world to answer back. The last thing we left in the grass was a small rustle, almost nothing at all. A faint movement under stems, a mouse making the sort of sound most of us would register only as a suggestion. If we follow that suggestion farther into the night, it leads us away from light almost completely, into spaces where eyes become unreliable and walls stop announcing themselves. A cave does this efficiently. So does muddy water. In both places, the world seems to withdraw its outlines. Our ordinary expectation is that hearing tells us an event has happened. A branch snaps. A door closes. Someone speaks from the next room. Sound feels temporal before spatial. It says something occurred, and perhaps we're in a broad sense, but not usually with the crisp geometry we associate with sight. We do not expect hearing to build a room, sketch the edge of an insect's wing, or report the speed of a moving fish. And yet some animals do exactly that. They send out brief pulses of sound, then listen to the returning echoes with such speed and precision that space begins to assemble. Distance, direction, surface, motion, perhaps even a hint of texture, arrive not as light on a retina, but as delays, shifts, and tiny distortions in the returning wave. It is less like hearing a noise than like tossing a handful of pebbles into darkness, and discovering that the darkness answers with structure. This is the strange turn in echolocation. Sound is not merely received, it is actively launched. A bat leaving its roost is not waiting for the cave to introduce itself. It is asking the cave, over and over, who is there, how far away, how narrow the gap might be, whether that faint moving patch ahead is open air, leaf, or prey. Toothed whales do something similar in water, another medium where vision can quickly become a rumor. In both lineages, separated by immense evolutionary distance, bodies arrived at a similar solution. Make a pulse, receive the echo, compute the world. For a bat, the pulse is often too high for us to hear, and may be produced in the larynx and sent outward through the mouth or nose as a shaped beam. That beam matters. A broad spray of sound would return a cluttered answer. A directed pulse is more like a flashlight with some discipline. Not a flood, but a pointed question. Then comes the crucial measure. Time. Sound takes a finite interval to travel outward, strike an object, and return. The delay may be tiny, but tiny is enough. A shorter delay means a nearer target. A longer one means something farther off. The animal does not need to translate this into meters the way a physicist would. It only needs a reliable relationship between delay and distance, refined through nervous tissue and practice, until the gap between call and echo becomes as meaningful as shape is to us. Direction can be inferred as well, from subtle differences in when and how a returning sound reaches each ear, and from the way the outer structures of the head and ears filter sound coming from above, below, ahead, or behind. Frequency matters too. Higher frequencies can reveal finer detail, though they fade more quickly over distance. Lower ones carry farther but blur the smaller edges. Like any instrument, echolocation is tuned by trade-offs. Now imagine a bat approaching a moth. At first the calls may be spaced farther apart. There is time to send one pulse, receive the answer, and prepare the next. But as the bat closes in, the entire conversation with space accelerates. Calls become more frequent. The intervals shrink. Near the final approach, some bats produce the rapid terminal buzz that biologists know so well. A burst of closely packed signals as the animal tracks a target that is itself erratic, delicate, and trying very hard not to be dinner. Each returning echo slightly updates the prey's position and movement. The air becomes a stream of revisions. Motion changes sound in another useful way. If a target is moving relative to the caller, the returning echo can shift in frequency through the Doppler effect. We meet this effect in ordinary life when a passing siren seems to rise and then fall in pitch. For an echolocating animal, such shifts can provide information about movement, especially when pursuing prey or distinguishing a fluttering insect from a still leaf. Some bats appear exquisitely tuned to these changes, adjusting their own calls to keep the most informative part of the echo within a range their auditory system handles particularly well. It is a delicate negotiation between voice and ear. The dolphin's version unfolds in water, where sound travels faster and farther than it does in air, and where murk can make vision almost ceremonial. A dolphin produces clicks, often focused through structures in the head that help shape the outgoing beam. The returning echoes are received and processed with remarkable sensitivity. An object suspended in cloudy water may not offer much to the eye, but it still reflects sound. Shape changes the echo. Density changes the echo. Internal structure may alter it too. What the dolphin experiences is not a little picture in the human sense, but neither is it a mere ping. It is a disciplined sensory reconstruction of what occupies the water ahead. Researchers have long been careful here, and it is worth being careful with them. When we say a bat or dolphin can image with sound, we are using a metaphor to approach an experience that is not ours. The metaphor is useful because it captures the active assembly of space. But the perception itself is built by a different body, on a different timetable, with a different nervous logic. Our visual approximations are translation devices, not direct windows into the animal's mind. Still, the metaphor of a room briefly lit by sound is hard to resist because it is so nearly right. A pulse goes out. The room comes back. Not continuously, not all at once, but in measured replies. A cave wall answers quickly. A moth answers with a smaller, more delicate signature. Open air answers with almost nothing, which is also a kind of information. Between these replies, the animal is not lost in blankness. It is already working with what the last echo revealed. This has consequences beyond the elegance of the mechanism. It means space can be assembled without photons. The world does not have to shine in order to be known. In darkness, in turbid rivers, in deep or cluttered places where light scatters, fades, or never arrives at all, sound can become architecture. A hunting path, an obstacle, a schoolmate, a fish, a wall, a branch, a net of danger or opportunity can all be inferred from returning pressure waves. Reality remains richly structured, even when vision resigns. That is perhaps the calmest surprise in all of this. Between each call there is a pocket of silence, and within that silence the measurement has already happened. The bat has already narrowed the gap. The dolphin has already judged the object. The world, for a moment, has been touched and answered, and if sound can build a map in air or water, then the next step is to slow the map down even further, to leave the quick bright flicker of echoes and enter a heavier conversation. Not a room answering through air, but a landscape answering through ground, roots, mud, and distant trembling. After the dark air has carried its last obvious sound, the story keeps traveling anyway. A call can leave a throat, pass through open space, touch the ground, and continue as a quieter kind of movement, not heard so much as conducted. We are used to treating Earth as a floor, a passive surface under the real action. But for many animals, the floor is busy. It trembles, carries warnings, leaks footsteps, and preserves messages for those equipped to feel them. For us, communication seems to belong mainly to air. Voices, music, thunder, the slam of a door. Even when we know that sound is vibration, we still imagine it as something that happens around us, not under us. If the ground shakes slightly when a truck passes, we notice it as an after effect, a bit of mechanical inconvenience. We do not usually kneel and ask what the pavement itself may be saying. That the world below our ankles is full of traffic. Vibrations move through soil, sand, roots, stems, wooden branches, and stone. A beetle chewing inside a plant makes one pattern. Rain makes another. Wind rattling leaves sends a broad, restless wash of motion through every stem it touches. A footstep lands as a brief pulse. A digging predator adds scratches and bursts. In that crowded mechanical weather, animals with the right sensors can separate one pattern from another with a calm skill that feels almost unfair. This is not quite the same as hearing, even though the physics are related. In air, pressure waves move through a gas. In the ground, the signal passes through a solid or a dense packed material, where motion can travel faster, farther in some conditions and in more complicated forms. The message may arrive through the feet, the legs, the jaw, the body wall, or a specialized receptor in a joint. Instead of translating a distant event into a sound-rich scene the way our ears do, the nervous system may sort pulses by timing, strength, direction, and frequency, asking a simpler, more practical question. What moved, where, and does it matter? Elephants offer one of the gentlest examples of this hidden channel becoming grand. When an elephant rumbles, part of that low-frequency call goes out through the air, but part of it can also couple into the ground as vibration. Over distance, especially across open land, those seismic components may reach other elephants through their feet, and perhaps through the trunk when it touches the earth. The animal does not need a lyrical appreciation of geology. It only needs the useful fact that a distant companion has turned the landscape into a messenger. Researchers studying elephant behavior have found that herds respond to low-frequency calls from far away, and that ground-borne vibration appears to be part of the information available to them. Their feet are not blunt pillars at all. They contain sensitive structures that help detect fine mechanical disturbances, and the trunk, so often imagined as a hand or hose or arm, can also become a listening instrument when lowered to the ground. An elephant standing still in this way can seem almost ceremonial, as if pausing for a thought. In practice, it may be receiving a report written in faint pulses under the dust. The image is lovely because it reverses our assumptions about scale. We expect large animals to dominate by force and small animals to specialize in delicacy. But here is a creature weighing several tons depending on signals subtle enough to vanish for us entirely. A foot broad as a serving tray becomes a measuring device. The plane itself becomes less like empty space and more like the soundboard of a giant instrument, one that keeps ringing after the visible performer has gone. That instrument is not reserved for elephants. Mole rats moving through their underground passages live in a world where walls and soil are not obstacles to sensation, but part of the medium. Tiny disturbances in the tunnel can carry news of a neighbor, a rival, or trouble approaching. Many insects also use plants as signaling wires. A leaf hopper or tree hopper can send vibrations through a stem that function almost like a private line, a message moving through the body of the plant rather than through the open air where more listeners might intercept it. To us, a stem is still. To them, it is a tense, narrow bridge that is always either quieting down or beginning to speak. This creates a difficult technical problem, and evolution has spent a very long time solving it. The problem is noise. A useful vibration is rarely alone. Wind shakes the plant. Another animal lands nearby. A drop of water strikes a leaf. The ground itself may be full of random small disturbances. So animals that depend on substrate-borne signals need filters, whether in their receptors, their posture, their behavior, or their nervous systems. Some are tuned to certain frequency ranges. Some pause and sample repeatedly. Some compare signals across several legs or body parts to estimate direction. What matters is not feeling everything. What matters is feeling the right thing and ignoring the rest. There is something quietly familiar in that. Our own perception also survives by neglect. In a crowded room, we follow one voice. In a city at night, we stop noticing the refrigerator, the traffic, the distant fan. Every sensory world is partly an art of refusal. But in animals tuned to the ground, that refusal happens across a channel we barely count as a channel at all. Even sand can become readable. Creatures living on loose surfaces may detect the approach of prey or predator by the way tiny grains transmit disturbance. The message is imperfect, softened and altered by the material itself, but imperfection is often enough. Survival does not require a perfect picture. It requires a timely clue. A pulse here, a scrape there, a repeating interval that means another body is coming closer. So the earth is not merely where life stands. It is one of the places life listens. A meadow, a tunnel, a tree stem, a desert crust, all can serve as extensions of the senses. Once that idea settles in, the landscape grows more crowded and more intimate at the same time. Not louder exactly, just more inhabited by intention. Every step risks becoming an announcement. Every resting surface may already be faintly alive with news. And somewhere in the dark, an elephant stops walking for a moment. Its weight sinks gently into the ground. Its trunk lowers. The plain, which looked empty a breath ago, is still carrying the last thin remains of a distant call. Beneath all that open space, something is trembling along a path too soft for us to follow, narrowing now from broad earth and root and stem toward a much finer line, until the next world of touch is stretched across the night with a single waiting thread. After the broad murmurs of ground and root, the scale narrows to something finer than thread. A web in evening light can seem almost absent until it catches a small shine and briefly admits that it is there. We tend to imagine the spider at its center as a patient watcher, a small, still hunter waiting for some visible mistake. The picture feels simple. Silk is a trap. The spider is the owner of the trap. Something blunders in and the story ends. For the spider, the web is not only a net hanging in space. It is closer to an outward extension of touch, a delicate structure built to move information. The animal does not need to see each event in the ordinary way we might expect. It can remain in dimness, legs resting on strands, while the web delivers news from a distance. That news arrives as vibration, though even that word is a little too blunt. A raindrop, a leaf fragment, a struggling fly, a cautious male of the same species, and a gust of wind may all shake silk, but they do not shake it in the same manner. They differ in timing, strength, rhythm, and frequency. The web is not merely disturbed. It is played, and the spider is listening through its feet. On the legs of spiders are tiny slit-like sensory organs called slit sensilla. They respond to strain in the hard outer skeleton, which means that when vibration travels through silk into the spider's body, the legs become remarkably sensitive measuring devices. The animal is not receiving a simple signal that says something happened. It is receiving a patterned mechanical event, full of texture. A trapped moth may produce frantic, irregular pulses. A courting male, if he is wise, sends a very different message. Carefully patterned plucks and trembles that reduce the chance of being mistaken for dinner. This is one of the quietly comic problems of spider life. To approach an orb-weaving female, a male must announce himself on the very instrument that also reports prey. He cannot simply arrive and hope for the best. He must perform distinction. His signals must say, in effect, not fly, definitely not fly. Female orb-weavers do, in fact, respond differently to different vibratory patterns. Researchers studying web-building spiders have shown that silk-borne signals can guide decisions about whether to rush toward a source, remain still, investigate cautiously, or avoid needless risk. The spider at the hub is not reacting to motion in the vague sense that we react when a door slams somewhere in the house. It is extracting structure from a mechanical scene. The web helps make that possible because it is not an accidental tangle. Its geometry matters. Orb webs are arranged with radial lines and spirals, and the silk itself differs from line to line. Some threads are built for support, some for capture, some for relaying information efficiently. Tension matters too. A tighter strand transmits differently from a loose one, just as a tightened string on an instrument changes its note and feel. By adjusting silk and posture, a spider can alter how the whole web behaves. This is where the web becomes especially strange. It is not just a passive structure waiting to be shaken by the world. In many cases, the spider actively tunes it. It can change tension, alter where it sits, and in some species even pluck the web to sample its state. If a web is damaged, wet, cluttered with debris, or loaded with the wrong kind of tension, the information coming through it changes. Building and maintaining the web is therefore not separate from sensing. Construction is part of perception. That is an unsettlingly elegant idea. We often think of a body as ending at the skin. Here the useful boundary extends into architecture. The spider makes a device outside itself, then lives in intimate contact with it until silk and nervous system work together as one sensing arrangement. The web is like a musical instrument whose strings also serve as distant fingertips. Something touches the outer edge, and the center knows. Imagine a night garden after the air has cooled. The web hangs between stems, nearly invisible except for a few silver lines. At the hub waits an orb weaver, legs lightly set on key strands. A small insect strikes the sticky spiral and thrashes. Immediately the web carries a burst of jagged information inward, fast, erratic, energetic, difficult to confuse with the deliberate pulses of courtship. The spider moves, not wildly, but with the assurance of an animal that already knows something about size, urgency, and location before it arrives. Now imagine a different event. A male approaches with immense caution. He does not hurl himself into the center of the web like a fool in a panic. He sends patterned vibrations, species typical and restrained, a signature intended to pass through the female's sensory filters as something other than prey. Even then, this is not a guaranteed diplomatic success, but it reveals the sophistication of the system. One structure can carry hunger, danger, weather, and romance, all translated into fine differences of motion. Wind complicates everything, of course. A web outdoors is never suspended in laboratory silence. Branches move, air presses and releases, debris brushes through. Part of the spider's achievement is not simply detecting vibration but sorting signal from background. In that sense, the web resembles any sensory world worth trusting. It does not remove noise. It teaches an animal what kind of noise belongs to the place and which departures from it matter. The consequence reaches beyond spiders. If a spider can extend perception into silk, then the border of an animal's sensing world is more negotiable than it first appears. Perception does not always sit neatly inside eyes, ears, or skin. Sometimes a creature builds part of its own sensory surface and waits inside it. Sometimes intelligence resides not only in nerves, but in the conversation between nerves and material. So the orb weaver at the center of its web is not simply waiting for something visible to happen. It is resting inside a nearly invisible field of touch, surrounded by taut lines that convert the ordinary accidents of the night into messages. The web trembles and the spider reads. The garden remains quiet to us. To the spider, it is full of arriving hands, and from this world of contact, strain, and trembling silk, we move outward again into something stranger still. Signals that pass not along threads, but silently through living tissue itself. The spider's web was a kind of borrowed skin, a net stretched outward so that the slightest touch became knowable. Now the scene loosens and drops away from silk into dark, shallow water, where another animal moves through a world that again seems almost blank to us. At night in a bay or over a muddy flat, sight becomes a poor guide. Sand swallows outlines. Water softens contrast. A creature can disappear simply by becoming still and lying low. We tend to file electricity somewhere else entirely. It belongs, in the ordinary human imagination, to storms, batteries, sockets, fences, and the memorable mistake of touching the wrong thing. It seems dramatic by definition. It cracks, flashes, warns, and hurts. It does not seem like the sort of thing that should linger quietly around a sleeping fish or leak gently from the muscles of a hidden ray. And yet living bodies are electrical through and through. Nerves send signals by shifting charged particles across membranes. Muscles contract because electrical changes move through their fibers. Hearts keep rhythm in pulses that are not metaphorically electrical, but literally so. Every animal with working nerves and muscles becomes, in a small and constant way, a source of faint electrical fields. On land, those fields fade quickly into dry air and cluttered contact. In water, especially salt water, the situation changes. Water conducts. A body no longer keeps all of its electrical business to itself. This does not mean the sea is glowing with giant bolts. The signals are tiny, almost absurdly tiny, far below anything a human can directly notice. But tiny is not the same as useless. Evolution has a habit of making exquisite use of what seems negligible, provided the signal is reliable and the receiver is patient enough to listen for it. Sharks and rays are among the best-known listeners. Around their snouts are arrays of small gel-filled organs called the ampullae of Lorenzini, first described centuries ago and still slightly uncanny to look at. From the outside, they appear as pores, modest and easy to miss. Inside, each pore opens into a canal filled with conductive jelly, leading to sensory cells that can respond to minute voltage differences. The arrangement is so understated that, if one did not know what it was for, one might take it for a decorative inconvenience, an odd bit of anatomy added without explanation. But the explanation is beautiful. These animals are not seeing electricity in the human sense, and any image we draw of that experience is only an approximation. They are detecting differences in electrical potential across the water around them. A fish tucked beneath sand may be visually hidden, but its gills still move, its muscles still hold tension, its nerves still fire, and its body still creates an electrical signature. The signal is faint, and the range is limited. Yet in the final moments of a hunt, final moments are exactly what matter. Imagine a hammerhead shark moving over a sandy bottom. The head, so strange to us, widens the spacing of its sensory equipment into a broad sweep. As it glides, it does not need the buried ray to break cover. It does not need a visible outline. The ray may be almost perfectly disguised, a smooth interruption flattened into the seafloor. But concealment is not the same as absence. Under the sand, a living body continues to announce itself in whispers. The hammerhead passes, turns, and narrows in, reading those whispers where our senses would insist there is nothing there at all. This is often described as passive electrolocation, because the shark or ray is detecting electrical fields produced by something else. It is eavesdropping on the ordinary electrical work of another body. Some fishes go further. Weakly electric fish, especially in murky fresh water, produce their own small electric fields and then sense how nearby objects distort them. This is active electrolocation. Instead of waiting for the world to speak first, the animal sends out a soft inquiry and reads the reply. A rock, a plant stem, another fish, even the conductivity of the water itself can alter the returning pattern. That distinction matters because it shows two related but different ways of knowing. One is like hearing a quiet conversation through a wall. The other is like tapping the wall and noticing how the sound changes. Both depend on the same larger fact. The world is full of structure that can be discovered without light. The distances involved are usually short. This is not a grand long-range scanning system that maps the whole ocean from miles away. Popular language often wants the dramatic version, but the real version is more intimate and, for that reason, more interesting. Electrolocation is a near-field sense. It becomes especially useful when an animal is close enough that vision may fail, smell may disperse, and the last decision still has to be made. In muddy water, at night, along the bottom, around crevices, beneath sand, in those small, uncertain spaces where contact is almost about to happen, electrical information can tip the balance. There is something gently funny in this. The hidden ray has done nearly everything right. It has chosen the proper ground, settled its body, matched the landscape, and become a nearly invisible patch of seafloor. By the standards of eyesight, the disguise is excellent, but the body cannot help being alive. That is the flaw in the camouflage, if flaw is the word. Breathing, signaling, maintaining itself, it releases the faint evidence of life as inevitably as a warm cup gives off heat. Perhaps a useful picture is this: not sparks in darkness, but ripples in an invisible pond. Every living body disturbs the medium around it, very slightly, simply by functioning. Most of those disturbances are too subtle for us to perceive, so we move through the world assuming stillness where there is only imperceptible activity. For a shark or an electric fish, that assumption would be poor practice. The pond is not still. It is delicately marked everywhere by conductance, charge, muscle, nerve, and skin. The consequence is larger than one successful hunt. It reminds us that hiding depends on the channel in which you are being observed. A buried animal can vanish from one kind of attention and remain plain to another. Sand blocks sight, but it does not cancel biology. Darkness removes color, but it does not silence voltage. Each environment contains several overlapping ways of being found, and no camouflage closes all of them at once. So the animal under the seafloor remains unseen, but not absent. It is still there in the water's quiet arithmetic, still outlined not by edges and shadows, but by minute differences passing through a conductive world. We stand outside that world, mostly deaf to it, as if watching a conversation through thick glass. And once that idea settles in, land begins to feel stranger too. If seawater can carry the faint electric traces of an animal body, then perhaps the meadow and garden are not as mute as they appear. Perhaps even rooted things, which seem to do so little at human speed, are giving off small electrical hints of their own. Back in the garden, after the dim water and the hidden shapes of electric hunting, everything looks almost embarrassingly normal. A stem holds up a flower. A bee approaches, hesitates, lands, and leaves. If we were asked how the meeting was arranged, most of us would give the standard answer. The flower advertised with color and scent. The bee noticed. Pollination happened. Case closed, neatly wrapped in petals. But gardens, like streets and shorelines and night air, are rarely satisfied with the neat version of events. Around a flower, there may be a faint electric pattern, small enough to escape ordinary notice, but real enough to matter to an insect built to detect it. A bee in flight often carries a positive electrical charge. The flower, connected through its stem and tissues to the ground, may sit at a different electrical potential. The result is not a spark in the dramatic sense, not a lightning bolt in miniature, but a delicate field between bodies that have never quite been electrically neutral companions. This sounds exotic until one remembers how often static electricity slips into ordinary life. A sputter crackles in winter. A balloon clings to a wall. A hand touches a metal doorknob and receives a tiny surprise. The garden is not doing something fundamentally different. It is doing something gentler, more continuous, and much more useful. As a bee flies, friction with the air and contact among body parts can help it accumulate charge. Tiny particles brushing past the insect, the movement of wings, and the general untidiness of moving through a dry atmosphere all contribute to a small electrical imbalance. Meanwhile, a flower is not an isolated ornament. It is part of a grounded plant, electrically coupled to the earth beneath it. That makes the blossom less like a floating decoration and more like the upper tip of a quietly wired structure where those different charges meet. The space around the bloom becomes a little uneven. Not visibly uneven, of course. No human strolling by would point and say that this daisy has one electric outline and that thistle another. But to a bee, the field may be one more layer of information laid over scent, shape, color, and texture, as if the flower had a whisper around it. The remarkable part is not just that the field exists. Physics gives away fields rather freely. The remarkable part is that bees appear able to use them. Experiments with bumblebees helped make this possibility harder to dismiss. In controlled settings, researchers offered artificial flowers that differed in their electric properties. Some were rewarded with sugar solution, some were not. The bees learned to distinguish them. When the electric cues were removed, their performance dropped. This did not mean electricity replaced color or smell. It suggested something more interesting and more realistic. The bee was reading several channels at once, and one of those channels was electrical. To do that, the insect needs a way to feel a field without grabbing it like an object. Bees seem to rely in part on mechanosensory hairs, the fine body hairs that can be deflected by tiny forces. An electric field can tug very slightly on these hairs, enough for a nervous system evolved from minute disturbances to register that something in the immediate space has changed. The bee does not need to see electricity the way we see a lamp. It only needs to detect that the air near this flower is not quite the same as the air near that one. That difference may also carry current information in the everyday sense of current as freshness, not just current as moving charge. When a bee lands on a flower, the electrical condition of the bloom can shift. The visitor changes the local arrangement, and the field may take a short time to recover. So one flower may say, in effect, "I have not been visited recently," while another may murmur, "Too late, someone has just been here." This is where the garden becomes especially elegant. Nectar is not unlimited. For a foraging bee, Time wasted on an empty or recently drained flower is time lost and energy spent. For the plant, attracting pollinators is valuable, but attracting them efficiently may be even better. A signal that changes immediately after a visit is a practical little status board, not a billboard, just a discreet light at the front desk. Researchers have been appropriately careful about the claims. Floral electric fields are a younger and more delicate topic than, say, the color vision of bees. No serious account should pretend every flower species has been mapped electrically, or that every decision by every pollinator has been explained. The evidence supports the existence of these fields and supports bee detection under experimental conditions. It also suggests that field changes after visits can matter. But a real meadow is crowded with overlapping cues, shifting humidity, wind, surface textures, odors, and light. Nature has a habit of using several partial answers at once. That caution makes the idea more persuasive, not less. It keeps the story grounded. The bee is not floating through a magical force world. It is moving through a practical information system made of many weak signals that become powerful when combined. Color may guide it from a distance. Scent may sharpen the invitation. Shape and landing platform matter at the final approach. Then, within the last small pocket of air around the bloom, electricity may provide a final hint about identity or recent use. So the flower is not simply colored. It is not simply fragrant. It is, in a modest and literal sense, electrically expressive. There is something charming about that phrase, because flowers seem so still. We place them in paintings, vases, and polite metaphors. Yet out in the night garden or the morning border, each bloom is participating in exchanges more dynamic than its stillness suggests. Bees arrive carrying charge from the open air. Petals and stems meet them as grounded structures. Hairs bend. Decisions are made in fractions of a second. Nectar is taken. Pollen travels. Then the flower is ever so slightly altered by having been part of the event. If we could somehow sense this channel directly, the garden might seem less like a collection of objects and more like a network of tiny weather systems, each blossom wearing a faint halo that shifts with contact. Not a glowing fantasy halo, but a measured difference in electrical state, as ordinary as the little shock from a doorknob and as consequential, for a bee, as a sign reading fresh or empty. And once that thought settles in, the scale begins to widen. If a pollinator can use a field stretched across the last centimeters before landing, then the invisible world is not only wrapped around flowers or hidden in dark water. It also extends upward and outward into a far larger field that surrounds the whole planet and quietly accompanies every migration beneath the night sky. A bee leaves the garden casually. It lifts from the flower, clears the hedge, and disappears into evening air that looks empty to us. A little later, above the same sleeping neighborhood, birds begin to pass in the dark. They are not dramatic about it. No parade announces them. They move as if the night contains lanes we cannot see, as if the sky has been quietly furnished with directions. Our ordinary expectation is that long journeys require obvious guides. A traveler needs a coastline, a mountain ridge, the sun, a pattern of stars, perhaps a river that can be followed like a line drawn across a map. And animals do use many of those things. Birds can read stars. They can use the setting sun. They notice landmarks, odors, winds, and the shape of the land below. But that is not the whole story. Again and again, experiments have suggested that many animals also respond to something so broad and so faint that most of us pass our entire lives without any conscious hint of it at all. They seem able to sense the magnetic field of the Earth. This field is not an exotic addition to the planet. It is part of the basic background, as constant and unadvertised as gravity. It arcs outward from the planet and loops back in again, wrapping the globe in a structure no eye can see directly. A compass needle aligns with that field and gives us a human translation. Yet the magnetic field is present whether or not anyone carries a compass. It passes through forests, oceans, clouds, feathers, skin, and bone. Migrating animals do not fly beside it. They fly within it. The oddity is not merely that the field exists, but that living bodies appear able to use it. One famous line of work involved migratory songbirds such as the European robin. During migration season, even in enclosed spaces, these birds show a restless urge to move in the direction they would naturally travel. Researchers placed them under controlled conditions and surrounded them with magnetic coils, devices that can rotate the local magnetic field without moving the room itself. The stars stayed where they were. The walls stayed where they were. The bird stayed where it was, but the invisible magnetic backdrop was turned. And when the field was turned, the bird's preferred orientation turned with it. That result did not prove every detail of how the bird sensed the field. It did something more modest and more important. It showed that the magnetic field was not just a poetic metaphor attached after the fact to migration. The bird behaved as though that field was usable information. Remove or alter the cue, and the animal's sense of direction shifted as well. What kind of compass is this? Not quite the tidy one we imagine in a pocket watch case, with a single needle pivoting over cardinal points. In birds, the evidence suggests something stranger, an inclination compass. Rather than reading magnetic north the way a sailor might, some birds seem sensitive to the angle at which Earth's field lines tilt through space. Near the equator, those lines lie more nearly parallel to the ground. Closer to the poles, they plunge more steeply downward. To an animal equipped to notice that tilt, the field is not only a direction but a geometry. North and south are not labels on a dial. They are differences in how the planet's magnetic fabric slopes through the body. This is where the science becomes both elegant and unfinished. Researchers do not yet have a single settled answer for the receptor mechanism. One of the most discussed ideas involves a light-sensitive protein called cryptochrome, found in the eyes of birds and other animals. Under the radical pair hypothesis, light triggers tiny chemical reactions inside this protein, producing pairs of molecules whose behavior may be influenced by the orientation of the magnetic field. The proposal is delicate down to the level of spinning electrons and fleeting quantum states, a compass dispersed through chemistry rather than held as a needle. That phrase matters because it captures how unfamiliar this sense may be. We are used to sense organs that present themselves clearly. An eye feels like an eye. An ear feels like an ear. Magnetoreception, if cryptochrome is involved, may be less like owning an instrument and more like having chemical events lean one way rather than another depending on how the body is aligned. Not a pointer inside the skull, but a bias woven into perception. There is also another possibility, or perhaps another part of the story. Some researchers have looked for magnetite, a naturally magnetic mineral, in animal tissues. Tiny particles of such material could, in principle, respond mechanically to Earth's field and provide information to the nervous system. Magnetite-based ideas have been explored in birds, fish, insects, and other animals. They remain plausible in some cases, disputed in others, and not yet arranged into a universal explanation. A sea turtle, a robin, and a mole rat need not all read the planet in the same way. That is one reason the field has been so difficult to understand. The signal is global, but biology is local. Each species arrives with its own body plan, habits, and problem to solve. A night migrating bird needs to maintain course over long distances. A hatchling sea turtle may need broad directional guidance when it first enters the ocean. A salmon returning to a river may use magnetic information at one stage and smell at another. The question is not whether magnetism replaces every other cue. It is how the cue joins the rest. Even in birds, the magnetic sense seems to have conditions and limits. Some experiments suggest that certain magnetic responses depend on particular wavelengths of light, which fits the cryptochrome idea. Other work has shown that weak radio frequency disturbances can interfere with orientation under some laboratory conditions. The broad picture is sturdy. Many animals show behavior consistent with magnetic sensing. The fine machinery remains partly veiled. There is something quietly moving about that uncertainty. Usually, when humans build a compass, we make a small object that points outward at the world. Here the world may be acting inside the animal directly. The planet does not merely sit beneath the bird as scenery. It reaches through the bird in a steady pattern, offering a directional structure that is neither seen nor heard in any ordinary sense. Night migration may also be a continuous conversation with the Earth itself, held in a language of tilts, reactions, and faint alignments. So the robin crosses a darkness that seems empty to us and does not find it empty at all. The sky offers stars when clouds permit. The land offers smells and coastlines when they are useful. And threaded through everything is the Earth's magnetic field, too weak for us to notice, they're apparently strong enough to matter to a body tuned for it. The bird does not need the whole planet explained. It needs only enough of the hidden pattern to hold its course. By now, the lesson is difficult to ignore. Animal senses do not arrive one at a time like tricks from separate boxes. They overlap. They consult one another. They trade confidence depending on weather, light, terrain, and need. So as the robin moves on through the dark, the next question is not which invisible signal is most impressive. It is how a living creature combines many partial truths into one usable world. After a while, the invisible world begins to sound crowded. The bird has stars, the fading position of the sun, odors carried over fields and water, the shape of a river, the pull of familiar coastlines, the broad tilt of the Earth's magnetic field, and the pressure of wind against its body. If we list these one by one, the animal can start to seem less like a living creature and more like an over-equipped aircraft. But ordinary life gives us a gentler comparison. Imagine leaving a building at dusk and finding your way to a parked car. You do not rely on one infallible clue. You remember roughly where you left it. You notice the slope of the pavement. You recognize a tree, a lamp, a painted line, the sound of traffic from the main road. If one cue is missing, the others do not vanish. They gather around the problem and help anyway. Something like that appears to happen in other animals, only with kinds of information that are often stranger than ours. The odd turn in this chapter is that the hidden senses we have been visiting do not usually operate as solitary miracles. Nervous systems compare, rank, combine, and sometimes ignore them. An animal does not simply possess a remarkable channel. It has to decide, moment by moment, which evidence deserves trust. In migratory birds, this becomes especially vivid at evening. Sunset is not just pretty light at the end of the day. It is a calibration period. Experiments suggest that some birds use the pattern of polarized light near sunset and the sun's position to help align other compass information for the coming night. Later, when stars emerge, stellar patterns can contribute. Magnetic cues can contribute as well. Landmarks matter when they are available. Wind matters, because a perfect heading is not much help if the air itself is quietly sliding you sideways. So the bird does not move through darkness with one grand answer glowing inside it. It moves with a small counsel. One voice says that the evening sky set the compass this way. Another says that the stars agree or disagree by a little. Another says the magnetic field still tilts through the body in a familiar direction. Another notes the river below, or the odor of coast and marsh, or the pressure of crosswind along one wing. These are not words, of course, and not conscious debate in the human sense, but the metaphor is useful because each source of information seems to arrive with a different level of confidence. That confidence can change quickly. A cloudy night weakens the star cue. A strong artificial light may confuse orientation near the horizon. An unfamiliar landscape reduces the value of landmarks. Fatigue, age, learning, and immediate need also matter. A young bird on its first migration is not solving the same problem in the same way as an older bird that has already crossed continents and survived the mistakes required to learn a route. This is why multisensory perception is not simply abundance. It is management. The brain, or even earlier networks of nervous tissue, has to spend energy sampling the world and deciding what to do with the samples. No animal can afford to examine every possible signal with equal care all the time. Attention is selective because metabolism is expensive. A creature survives not by building a perfect model of reality, but by building one that is good enough for the next wingbeat, the next landing, the next meal, the next mile. Researchers sometimes describe this in terms of cue reliability. If one signal has proved dependable in the present conditions, the animal may weight it more heavily. If another becomes noisy or contradictory, it may be downgraded. The nervous system is not asking what is true in the abstract. It is asking what will keep orientation coherent tonight. Dogs provide a homelier version of the same principle. On an evening walk, a dog pauses beside that apparently empty patch of pavement we met at the beginning of this episode. To us, nothing is there. To the dog, scent may be the strongest thread at first, but scent is not acting alone. The dog may also be hearing a distant tag jingle, noticing a recent movement in the shrubs, catching the posture of another animal at the edge of vision, feeling the texture of ground underfoot, tracking where the leash has gone taut, and remembering what usually happens at this corner. If the breeze shifts, the nose loses confidence and the eyes may matter more. If the light falls, hearing and memory may rise in the ranking. If a squirrel suddenly bolts up a trunk, vision can override everything else in an instant with great democratic unfairness. That quick takeover is part of the story too. Sensory systems are not only blended, they are hierarchical. Certain signals can veto others when urgency changes. A bird may trust a broad compass most of the night, then abandon that priority when a coastline appears where it should. A fish may follow electrical information in murky water, then switch toward vision when the scene clears. A spider may ignore background tremors, until one thread delivers the particular pattern that means prey instead of weather. Perception, then, is less like opening a window and more like running a quiet control room. Predictions are constantly being made about what should be present next. Incoming signals are compared with those expectations. When they match well enough, the world feels stable. When they clash, attention sharpens. This working story is the useful part of an umwelt, not a complete world, not an objective copy of reality, a stitched one, a serviceable one, a world assembled from partial witnesses who are mostly trustworthy and occasionally wrong. That may sound less romantic than the idea of a single hidden sense carrying an animal flawlessly through mystery. But it is, in its quieter way, more impressive. The coherence of animal life does not depend on perfect signals descending from nature like instructions. It depends on flexible bodies and nervous systems that can cross-check uncertain evidence and keep going. So when the migrating bird passes overhead, the night around it is not solved by one star, one field, one odor, or one remembered valley. The path holds because enough cues agree well enough, often after being tuned against one another at sunset and revised again in flight. And when the dog stops on the pavement below, it is not consulting one magical faculty either. It is building a temporary verdict from scent, sound, sight, memory, movement, and context. By the time we return to the ordinary street, that may be the calmest and strangest lesson of all. The hidden layers of the world do not need to become ours for them to be real. We do not have to feel the magnetic tilt, read ultraviolet marks, or sense faint electric contours to understand what animals are showing us. Reality was never a single finished picture waiting for one ideal observer. It is a stack of available clues, and each creature gathers the ones it can use. That is enough to make the evening walk feel larger, but gentler. The pavement can stay plain to us. The garden can remain dim. The sky can look empty. Around and above those familiar scenes, other lives are composing workable worlds from signals we barely notice, and doing so with a kind of quiet competence that asks for admiration, not envy. We end where we began, beside a dog that has paused at an unremarkable patch of pavement. To us, the scene still seems almost empty. A curb, a little cooling concrete, a hedge holding the last warmth of the day, perhaps a moth moving in the porch light farther down the street. If we were asked to describe this place honestly, we might feel that we already had. We would name the objects, the light, the hour, and assume the world had been accounted for. But that was always the gentle mistake. The pavement was never just pavement. It was only pavement for the particular body standing upright inside a human evening. For the dog, that same square of ground is a layered chemical archive. Other dogs have passed through and left fragments of themselves there, not as stories in words, but as drifting molecules that cling, fade, overlap, and survive the day in different ways. A nose close to the ground does not meet a blank surface. It meets traffic, identity, timing, mood, health, direction. The street has a memory, and the dog reads it with the patience of someone turning pages in dim light. Just above that same ground, a bee would enter a different neighborhood entirely. The flowers bordering the walk, so decorative to us, are not merely colored ornaments arranged around a path. They are patterned signals, shaped for eyes unlike ours, catching traces of light we do not naturally use. What looks to us like one calm blossom has, for another nervous system, routes, contrasts, and emphases. A landing place, a guide, a small instruction written in a spectrum we pass through without noticing. Somewhere between stem and stone, a spider keeps watch through tension rather than sight. The world arrives to her as a sequence of pulls, tremors, and fine changes in thread and surface. The hedge is not still. The fence is not still. The air itself, once translated through silk, becomes a kind of report. She does not need the garden to glow. She needs it to answer when touched. Overhead, when the light thins further, a bat will cut through the dust and assemble a usable world from returning echoes. Not a picture in the human sense, but a steady harvest of distance. Edge, opening, and insect. Nearby, a bird settling its bearings may fold several quiet sources of information together at once. Fading landmarks, the geometry of light that remains in the sky, perhaps cues linked to Earth's magnetic field, perhaps learned features of terrain. None of these animals receives the garden as a complete scene. Each receives enough, and that may be the most important comfort in all of this. Enough is what every creature has always been built for. We often imagine perception as a ladder, with dim organisms at one end and better, richer, sharper observers at the other, as though somewhere there ought to be a final winner who takes in reality exactly as it is. But the living world does not seem very interested in producing such a witness. Evolution is not assembling a perfect audience for the universe. It is handing out practical lanterns. Each lantern illuminates a little differently. One catches warmth. One catches salt or blood or bloom. One catches polarized light in the sky. One catches tiny electric distortions around a body in water. One catches the long, patient pull of migration across a continent. Ours catches language, faces, fine color in daylight, hands at work, the reading of marks on a page, and all the social weather that comes with living among other humans. It is a beautiful lantern. It is also a narrow one. So the quiet revelation of this street, and of the garden beside it, is not that animals possess magical access while we are left in darkness. It is that darkness and access are always relative to the body doing the noticing. The bee is blind to many things that matter to us. We are blind to many things that matter to the bee. The dog would miss the sentence you are hearing now. We miss the scent headline on the curb. The spider ignores the flower's colors and attends to vibrations with exquisite seriousness. The flowering plant itself, without seeing in any animal way at all, still participates in these exchanges through structures and signals shaped across time. One place, then, contains many places. Or perhaps it is better to say that one place contains many transparent maps, all laid over the same ground. On one map, the route is drawn in odor and freshness. On another, in ultraviolet contrast. On another, in tension lines and minute shivers. On another, in heat. On another, in electrical edges. On another, in magnetic tendency and remembered direction. On ours, perhaps, it is the familiar map of sidewalk, hedge, parked car, front door, and a dog who has become curious for reasons we cannot share. None of these maps is the whole territory. None is false simply because another exists beside it. This is where the old idea of a creature's world, its own fitted slice of reality, becomes less like a theory and more like a kind of evening manners. It asks us to stop assuming that the visible scene is the finished one. It asks us to be a little less arrogant about what counts as present. The hidden layers around us are not failures of human perception in any tragic sense. They are reminders that life does not need total knowledge to move gracefully through the world. It needs selective knowledge, timed well. There is something deeply restful in that. You do not have to detect the magnetic field to live under the night sky. You do not have to read ultraviolet marks to admire a flower. You do not have to sense the soft electric shape of a fish or the tremor passing through a web for those realities to be there, quietly doing their work. The world is busy with signals that do not require your supervision. Perhaps that is why the idea feels calming rather than disappointing by the end. Human limits, seen one way, can sound like exclusion. Seen another way, they become permission. Permission to stop insisting that reality must appear in one familiar format before it counts as real. Permission to let other creatures keep their own versions of the evening. Permission to stand in one ordinary place and understand that it exceeds you, gently, on all sides. The dog, having finished reading what the pavement had to say, lifts its head and moves on. Nothing dramatic announces the moment. No hidden world switches off. The street remains quiet. The hedge darkens. The warm stone cools. Above the houses, the sky continues to empty itself into night while signals invisible to us keep crossing it, touching it, pooling near the ground, humming in flowers, clinging to scent, trembling in silk and passing through living bodies that know how to use them. And the pavement, which seemed empty at first, goes back to being what it always was. One small piece of earth holding many worlds at once.